In the previous episode, Jin's manager proposed that he should host a housewarming party for the office staff. When Jin returned home and shared this idea with Jia, her expression became somewhat confused, and she asked, "Why a housewarming party all of a sudden?" Jin explained that the idea had come up after the office meeting, during which everyone congratulated him on their marriage. He reassured Jia that if she was uncomfortable with the party, they could simply take the staff out to a restaurant for dinner. However, to Jin's surprise, Jia responded, "No, it's not necessary, let's have it at home." Jin was concerned that Jia might be forcing herself into this situation, and he offered to handle everything. But Jia was determined and reassured him that she could manage it. The next day, as they were both getting ready for work, Jin brought up the topic of the party again and asked Jia if she was sure about it. He wanted to make sure she was not doing this reluctantly. However, Jia had other plans in mind. She saw this as an opportunity to get back at Jin for the cat incident, and so she replied, "I really want to do it, so don't worry." Jin was still somewhat uncertain but chose to trust her words. He bade farewell to Jia with a smile, which took her by surprise. Jia couldn't help but wonder why he suddenly looked so happy when he was about to do something he apparently didn't want to do. In her mind, Jin was like a robot, always working diligently. But she had to remind herself that she was now his wife and pondered how he addressed her when talking to others, spouse, housemate, or wife. The thought was a bit embarrassing, and she pushed it aside to focus on the preparations for the party. As the time for the housewarming party approached, Jia welcomed everyone with a bright and warm smile. She playfully told Jia and Mincheol, "You better treat me well from now on for doing this for you." To everyone's surprise, Jia had managed to prepare a delicious array of dishes for the party, showcasing her culinary skills. Both Jin and the guests were astonished at how she had pulled it off. Choi, while eating, asked Jin if they ate like this every day, but before Jin could respond honestly, Jia interjected to maintain the illusion. As the evening wore on, the atmosphere became livelier, and for the first time, Jin joined in the celebration and had a few drinks. In the midst of it all, Choi addressed Suyin, saying, "Jin and his wife invited you to their housewarming party, and you've seen them together. Are you still doubting them?" Suyin playfully poked Choi with her elbow and responded hesitantly, "All right, I get your point. I'll proceed with what I had prepared, so stop poking me." Choi stood up and suggested that it was time for the highlight of the evening. He explained that he had asked everyone to write down any questions they had about Jin beforehand, and it was time to ask those questions. As Choi began reading the first question, his expression shifted, and he glanced at manager Suyin. To everyone's astonishment, the question requested that Jin and Jia kiss. Jia was in high spirits as she inquired, "What's the first question?" Choi, with a smile, opted to skip the question, announcing, "Next." In the midst of this intriguing game of revelations, Jin discreetly prodded Jia's hand, beckoning her closer. Confused by his request, Jia moved in closer to Jin, waiting for an explanation. Jin's words held concern, "Are you okay with all of this? The atmosphere is getting peculiar, and I suspect they will pry into our private matters. Remember, you told me not to share our private matters with anyone, right?" Jia, wearing a warm smile, responded, "Jin, we're legally married, aren't we? So, wouldn't it be nice to portray ourselves as a happy married couple in front of others?" Jin nodded in agreement, and Jia continued, "In that case, I suggest we answer with moderation and flexibility to avoid future complications." Jin consented to her proposal, and thus, they established a new temporary rule: a certain degree of flexibility is allowed for a smooth relationship. Choi proceeded to the next question, which originated from Kim Jinya in their department. This question delved into their marriage proposal, specifically inquiring about the when, where, and how of it. Jia deliberated on how to respond, and as everyone began a countdown, she opted to take a drink as a penalty instead of answering. Unexpectedly, Jin took the initiative to reply, describing a casual scenario where he was eating chicken in the smoking area when Jia spontaneously proposed to him. This revelation left Jia momentarily speechless, but she refrained from elaborating and accepted the drink penalty. Jia, however, silently noted that she needed to discuss this revelation with Jin later. The next request pertained to the location and timing of their first kiss. This query left Jia flustered as she contemplated her response. It seemed obvious that their first kiss should have taken place at their wedding. However, an unsettling memory resurfaced. On their wedding day, she had explicitly warned Jin not to kiss her. This internal turmoil weighed heavily on her as the countdown commenced. Unexpectedly, Jin interjected, sharing a whimsical and seemingly fictitious account of their first kiss. According to Jin, it occurred when they were both 5 years old at daycare. He playfully recalled that Jia had earned the nickname, Kissing Ghost, because she roamed around kissing other children. Jia was astounded by Jin's surprising, irritating, and somewhat embarrassing response. It was a rather unconventional and playful response to the question. As the party eventually came to an end, Suyin observed Jin and Jia's endearing bond and couldn't help but feel a twinge of sadness. During their drive back home, Choi sensed Suyin's uncertainty and asked her about it. Choi shared his confusion, acknowledging that Jin and Jia's behavior and responses raised questions about whether they were being genuine or not. He even suggested the idea of investigating further. However, Suyin dismissed the idea, stating, "Never mind that." Her response caught Choi off guard as he inquired whether she was giving up on Jin so easily. Suyin smiled, recognizing that she didn't quite fit into their happiness, and acknowledged, "Anyway, it's over now, and I've confirmed it myself." In an unexpected turn of events, Choi made a U-turn in the car, leaving Suyin puzzled. She questioned his actions, wondering why he was suddenly changing course. Resolutely, Choi explained that he had a sudden craving for a drink and asked if Suyin had time to join him. He clarified that she didn't have to drink if she didn't want to but requested her company. With a blush and a mischievous laugh, Suyin agreed, stating, "If it's your treat, then I'm happy to accompany you." Choi gave her free rein to choose the food, and Suyin eagerly began searching for a suitable dining option. Witnessing Suyin's happiness brought a warm smile to Choi's face. The next morning, Choi woke up feeling slightly sweaty and flustered. To his surprise, manager Suyin was sleeping beside him, looking equally bewildered by the unexpected turn of events. It was clear that their night had taken an unforeseen twist, leaving them both in a state of confusion about the nature of their relationship. On that eventful day in Jin's home, the early morning sunlight cast a warm glow on the room. However, the atmosphere inside was far from tranquil. Jia was engaged in a spirited conversation, or more accurately, a scolding session, with Jin. Her frustration reached its peak as she reprimanded him for his indiscretions at the recent housewarming party. Jia made it abundantly clear how embarrassing it was to share with their friends and colleagues that their first kiss had supposedly transpired in kindergarten. To make matters worse, she couldn't fathom how he thought it was a good idea to mention that she had proposed to him while he was enjoying a meal of chicken. It was a narrative that simply didn't add up. In her frustration, Jia pondered the enigma that was Jin. She recalled his propensity for buying 7 identical articles of clothing in an instant and his penchant for commencing his day with protein bars. She wondered why she expected to engage in rational discourse with someone whose actions defied logic. In the end, she chose not to reason with him and simply declared that it was prohibited to tell people that we had our first kiss in kindergarten. This decision left Jin perplexed, prompting him to ask, "Then what should we say if someone asks when and where it happened?" Jia wrestled with the predicament of explaining the absence of a first kiss in their supposed married life. She contemplated the idea of claiming that they had shared their first kiss while dating, but that would necessitate revealing that they had known each other since their school days. The solution proved elusive, and the matter remained unresolved. As the couple stood entangled in their dispute, Jia's phone rang, interrupting their conversation. Her mother's incoming call brought an unexpected twist to the situation. The screen displayed both her mother and father, and Jia couldn't help but question the unusual video call. Jin, too, appeared on the screen to greet his mother-in-law. Jia casually inquired, "Why are you video calling me all of a sudden, Mom?" Her mother answered with a teasing tone, "Guess where we are, Jia?" With indifference, Jia replied, "At the movie theater, having a date, and trying to brag to me." But her mother had more to reveal. She disclosed that it was indeed a date, but their primary reason was the release date of Spaghetti Man Lost the Way. This seemingly absurd title referred to a character in a movie who had accidentally ingested radioactively contaminated spaghetti. Jia's anxiety mounted as her mother's revelation continued, "We came to the theater as soon as it opened this morning and watched it with your father." Realization dawned on Jia, and in a state of dread, she abruptly ended the call. Turning to Jin, determination shone in her eyes as she declared, "Jia and Mincheol, get ready, we are going out." This spontaneous outing was not your typical movie date. Instead, it was rooted in a peculiar family tradition. In Jia's family, there was a unique penalty for those who watched a movie before others. They had to endure the role of spoiler provider. It was a family ritual, and considering the popularity of Spaghetti Man, she knew everyone would be watching it. With determination and a sense of mission, Jia headed to the theater, armed with her favorite popcorn. However, she noticed Jin's hesitancy. Curious, she asked, "What's with that look, Jin Mincheol? Don't you like Spaghetti Man, or do you hate coming to the movie theater?" Jin's response was both surprising and introspective. He confessed his enthusiasm for the movie and his eagerness to watch it. Yet, he couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. Earlier, during their video call with Jia's parents, she had playfully accused them of having a date. Now, he found himself questioning whether this spontaneous outing was also something akin to a date. Jia was taken aback by his words, but as the movie began, she decided to set aside these thoughts and immerse herself in the story. The film evoked a torrent of emotions, and she was thoroughly enjoying the experience. However, during a moment of anticipation, as Jia reached for her popcorn, her hand brushed against Jin's. When she glanced at him, Jin, too, appeared flustered and quickly looked away. The brief, unintentional contact left Jia feeling somewhat embarrassed. As the movie reached its poignant conclusion, Jia couldn't help but shed tears of joy. It was an emotional and immersive experience, and she was deeply moved. But what fascinated her even more was Jin's reaction. Eager to gauge his response, she stole a glance at him. To her delight, she discovered that Jin Mincheol was just as much of an otaku, an enthusiast of popular culture, particularly in the realms of anime, manga, and film, as she was. This revelation filled her with happiness, knowing that the person who had accompanied her was just as engrossed in the movie as she had been. As they left the theater, Jia was in high spirits, animatedly discussing the movie's best moments with Jin. But she couldn't ignore the sensation that had begun to take root. What had initially been a hurried escape from spoilers was gradually transforming into something akin to a real date. After all, it was their first time venturing out together in this manner. In the midst of the bustling post-movie crowd, Jia collided with someone, causing her to teeter perilously on the edge of an elevator. Jin, ever the vigilant companion, sprang to her rescue. In the chaos of the moment, their faces drew near, and their lips met. It was an unforeseen and tender moment, the culmination of their spontaneous movie outing and a harbinger of the evolving chapter in their newlywed life. Amidst the gathered crowd, the world seemed to fade away, and Jia and Jin were locked in a tender embrace. Their impromptu kiss sparked reactions that ranged from romantic sighs to disgusted murmurs. It was a stolen moment of intimacy, right there in the open, and it was both shocking and beautiful. For what felt like an eternity, Jia and Jin remained locked in the kiss, drawing more and more attention from the onlookers. As the seconds ticked by, some people's faces shifted from surprise to admiration, while others couldn't hide their discomfort. Finally, Jia reluctantly pulled away from Jin's lips. Jin still held her in his arms like a protective fortress, but she playfully demanded to be put down. Once her feet touched the ground, she paused for a fleeting second, looking deep into Jin's eyes. Then, without a word, she abruptly darted away from him. She sprinted into the distance, creating a considerable gap between them. I cancel what happened just now," Jia yelled, standing far away from Jin. Her voice carried a mixture of embarrassment and regret. Jin stood there, baffled by her outburst. He watched as Jia shouted her peculiar explanation, "Don't you know the 3-second rule? Anything that happens within 3 seconds can be cancelled. Even food dropped on the ground can still be picked up and eaten within 3 seconds." Despite her haste, Jia managed to maintain her composure. She retreated to a nearby smoking area, her sanctuary for contemplation. Sitting there, she couldn't help but berate herself for her impulsive reaction. She questioned why she had treated their moment together like some sort of game. She was acutely aware that they were no longer children, and their actions held consequences. As she reflected on her behavior, she felt a sense of misery and pondered how she would face Jin now. Unexpectedly, Jin appeared beside her, casually stating, "Just as I thought, you came here to smoke. If you're done, let's get rid of that smell now." Jia, however, wasn't ready to let it slide. She needed to address the issue at hand, so she halted Jin and asked, "Hey, Jin, are you okay with the fact that our lips touched?" Jin responded with a poker face, 3-second rule, Jia. You cancelled it within 3 seconds, which means we pretend it didn't happen, right? He went on to explain further, so, what about our meal? Do you want to eat and then head home or go straight home? Jia, unsure of Jin's emotional state, replied, "Whatever you like." As they sat down to eat, Jia couldn't help but wonder why Jin was so calm about the entire situation. Did he genuinely understand her intentions when she urged him to forget about it? She contemplated the meaning of his nonchalant demeanor. On their way back home, with thoughts of their accidental kiss still lingering in her mind, Jia wondered how Jin was taking it. After all, two adults in their 30s had shared their first kiss, albeit accidentally. Since they were married, and this was their first time watching a movie together, she thought Jean would be just as affected by it as she was, even if just for a moment. The unexpected turn of events left her slightly disappointed. Jean, however, had his own thoughts on the matter. As they continued their journey home, he spoke up, "Han Jia, as I thought, this won't do. I need to address what happened earlier, when our lips touched. Technically, it lasted more than 3 seconds. If I recall correctly, it was around 5 seconds. What I'm trying to say is, how about we consider this our first kiss?" He hesitated for a moment before adding, "I mean, do you remember what we discussed this morning about when and where our first kiss happened? Since it technically occurred earlier, why not go with that scenario?" Jia, unable to come to terms with the sudden shift in their relationship, made an impulsive decision. The 32-year-old had run away after just a month of marriage, leaving a trail of confusion and uncertainty behind. The reason for her flight: she simply couldn't bear to face Jia and Mincheol. In her haste to escape, she sought refuge with her sister Jimin and her brother-in-law, where a new chapter of her life began, free from the complexities and uncertainties of her previous life. As they say, life is full of unexpected twists, and for Han Jia, this was just the beginning of her unconventional journey. Now, let's take a moment to delve into the 13,251st Jia Summit. It was a unique gathering that brought together 6 versions of Jia from different age groups, spanning from the present day, 30, 25, 20, 15, down to just 5 years old. In the midst of this intriguing gathering, they contemplated the events of the day, particularly the kiss that occurred 5 hours ago. The present-day Jia considered it a mistake, but the pivotal moment occurred when Jean asked if they should consider it their first kiss. This suggestion left her feeling an intense mix of anger and frustration, which had prompted her to distance herself from Mincheol. She decided to seek refuge at her sister Jimin's place, unwilling to return to her hometown for the time being. The 15-year-old version of Jia inquired why Jia had not gone to stay with her friends instead. However, Jia explained that there was a substantial gap in experiences and emotions between her 15-year-old self and her present self, largely due to the influence of the 25-year-old Jia. Moreover, she believed that Jimin and her husband owed her for bringing them together and helping them through their early dates when she was earning. Upon entering Jimin's house, Jia presented a gift to her brother-in-law and greeted her sister with a smile. Jimin, with a playful smile, teasingly remarked, "My kind sister, what brings you here on weekends without prior notice? How in the world did you learn about manners?" Glancing at the kids playing with their father, Jia observed the high energy levels of her nephew and niece. In contrast, her brother-in-law appeared calm and composed. Jia couldn't help but ask, "Hey, little sister, isn't my nephew's and niece's energy a bit extra? Your husband is so calm, so who do they resemble?" Jimin responded with a chuckle, "It's because they resemble me. If you look at our childhood, we were just as energetic as they are now." Jimin cheekily remarked, "So, my mom's eldest daughter, for whatever reason you've come here, let me tell you something about Spaghetti Man, the recently released movie." Jia quickly interrupted, stating that she had already watched it, much to Jimin's disappointment. She poked fun at Jia for her idleness and then skillfully transitioned into more probing questions, inquiring about her brother-in-law's recent activities. Caught off guard, Jia stammered and replied, "What do you mean, something happened?" Jimin, seemingly aware of Jia's situation, pointed out her habit of withdrawing when things went awry. She suggested that Jia might be upset with her brother-in-law about something and had nowhere else to go, so she sought refuge in their home for comfort. Despite realizing that Jimin had accurately discerned her emotional state, Jia attempted to brush it off by saying, "I just wanted to see you and my niece and nephew." Jimin was touched by her sister's care for their family, which brought a smile to her face. She suggested that it was the perfect time for Jia to be there, handed the kids over to her, and left for a weekend outing with her husband. As Jimin departed, she playfully expressed her love for her sister and seized the opportunity to help Jia find solace in their home. It was a cunning move by Jimin, but Jia acknowledged that it offered her a temporary place to stay. However, as the hours passed, the 32-year-old Jia began to appreciate the challenges of looking after her niece and nephew. She gained newfound respect for her parents as she navigated the world of childcare. Jia attempted to engage her niece and nephew with the television to give herself a break. But, much to her chagrin, the kids displayed a mischievous streak reminiscent of her own childhood, making her life more chaotic. Just when she thought she was about to be overwhelmed, the doorbell rang. Relieved, Jia thought it might be a delivery person, someone who could offer a brief respite from the chaos. However, her relief was short-lived as she remembered that modern delivery services often left packages at the door without a personal exchange. Still, she hesitantly opened the door, only to be shocked by the sight of Jia and Mincheol standing there with a gift box. He calmly stated, "It's a delivery," as he extended the gift toward her. Jia's initial reaction was to slam the door shut in his face. Jean knocked on the door, calling her name repeatedly, but Jia remained inside, perplexed by how Jean had managed to find her. She couldn't help but wonder if he had somehow placed a tracking device on her.